A Roman emperor once tried to make his horse a consul. This is the story of Emperor Caligula and his infamous stallion, Incitatus. By the end, you will know the shocking truth behind one of history's most bizarre tales, separating wild legend from historical reality. We will uncover whether this was an act of pure madness, a brutal political joke, or something else entirely. What does it truly mean when absolute power corrupts absolutely? His full name was Gaius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, a lineage heavy with expectation, but history remembers him by a childhood nickname, Caligula, or Little Boots. As a small boy, he accompanied his father, a celebrated military commander, on campaign. His mother dressed him in a miniature soldier's uniform, complete with tiny custom-made boots. The troops affectionately called him Little Boots, a name that would follow him forever, a stark contrast to the monster he would become. When he became emperor at the age of 24, Rome rejoiced. The people were weary of his reclusive and harsh predecessor, Tiberius. They saw in the young Gaius a return to the golden age of his beloved ancestors. For the first few months, he was perfect. He granted bonuses to the army, recalled exiles, and put on spectacular public games. He was the people's prince, the breath of fresh air the empire desperately needed. But then, as severe illness struck him down, when he recovered, the man who emerged was fundamentally changed. The ancient historians Suetonius and Cassius Dio describe his reign after this point as a rapid descent into tyranny, cruelty, and outright madness. He declared himself a living god and demanded that senators worship him. He humiliated the powerful elite, forcing them to run alongside his chariot for miles. He emptied the state treasury on lavish, pointless building projects and his own extravagant whims. This is the environment from which the story of his horse, Incitatus, would spring. In the hothouse atmosphere of imperial Rome, an emperor held absolute power. His every word was law, his every action was scrutinized and recorded by historians, often writing under senatorial patronage. These writers had a motive to paint Caligula in the worst possible light, to justify his eventual assassination. So when we hear tales of Caligula's excess, we must ask ourselves, are we reading cold fact or political propaganda designed to blacken a tyrant's name for all eternity? Into this world of absolute power and simmering resentment stepped a four-legged celebrity, a stallion named Incitatus. His name meant swift or at full speed, and he was no ordinary horse. He was a champion racehorse, a prized thoroughbred from the famed Spanish stock, renowned for its incredible speed and spirit. In the high-stakes world of Roman chariot racing, owning a horse like Incitatus was like owning a modern-day super team. Caligula was not just a casual fan, he was a superfan, the leader of the Greens, one of the powerful racing factions. His passion for the sport was all-consuming, and Incitatus was his ultimate trophy. But the stories of how he treated this animal went far beyond the typical pampering of a valuable athlete. Ancient sources describe a lifestyle of almost unimaginable luxury for a beast. Incitatus was said to reside in a marble stable, eating from a manger carved from ivory. He was draped in a purple blanket, a color reserved exclusively for emperors and the highest echelons of Roman society. A jeweled collar adorned his neck, and he was even gifted his own house, a full residence complete with a staff of servants and its own furniture. The image is absurd, a horse living like a senatorial nobleman. But was this a sign of genuine madness, or was there a brutal method to this apparent insanity? The line between pampering a prized asset and descending into delusion seems dangerously thin. Caligula's favoritism was an extension of his obsession with the games, but it was also a weapon. By elevating his horse to a status that rivaled and even surpassed that of the human elite, he was sending the Roman aristocracy a message they could not possibly misunderstand. So the ultimate question remains, did the emperor truly intend to make his horse a consul? Our two main sources present conflicting accounts. The biographer Suetonius states that Caligula often threatened he would make Incitatus a consul, while the historian Cassius Dio claims the emperor actually did appoint the horse to that high office. This is the central contradiction at the heart of the legend. To understand which version might be closer to the truth, we need to look at the men who wrote these words. Both Suetonius and Dio were writing decades, even generations, after Caligula's violent death. They were not neutral observers. They were working with second-hand accounts, often from senators who despised the emperor. Their goal was not just to record history, but to provide a moral lesson on the dangers of tyrannical rule. They had a clear agenda to paint Caligula as the ultimate monster, and what better way to illustrate his contempt for Roman traditions than by having him elevate a beast over the entire senatorial class? This was political propaganda of the highest order, designed to justify his assassination and blacken his name for all eternity. The story of the horse consul was the perfect, unforgettable symbol of his madness. But what if the truth was not madness, but a different kind of genius, a brutal and calculated satire? Consider the role of a consul in ancient Rome. It was the highest political office in the Republic, a position once held by men like Julius Caesar. By Caligula's time, the role had been stripped of much of its real power by the emperors, but it remained a supreme honor, a symbol of status and prestige that the senatorial aristocracy still fiercely craved. Caligula's threat, then, becomes a devastating political joke. He was not just insulting the senators, he was systematically dismantling their entire worldview. He was saying, "This office you fight and beg for, this symbol of your noble birth, is so meaningless that I could give it to my horse, and the empire would function no differently." He was holding up a mirror to their irrelevance, demonstrating that in his absolute monarchy, even his favorite animal was more loyal, more valuable, and more worthy of honor than they were. The marble stable, the ivory manger, the house with servants, all of it can be seen as part of this elaborate performance, a piece of political theater designed to inflict maximum humiliation. He was not just pampering a pet, he was staging a public demonstration of his power to redefine reality itself. The story of a horse consul did more than just humiliate the Senate, it cemented Caligula's legacy for 2,000 years. This single anecdote became the ultimate proof of his insanity, transforming him from a complex historical figure into the archetypal mad emperor. But to understand its power, we must see it alongside his other documented actions. He was said to have conversations with the moon, to order his soldiers to collect seashells as spoils of war from the ocean, and to suddenly declare a war on the sea god Neptune, commanding his troops to stab the waves with their swords. These stories paint a picture of a mind completely detached from reality, yet even here, the line between madness and method blurs. Was collecting seashells a sign of delusion, or was it a cruel, pointed lesson to his soldiers about the futility of their demands for more pay? Every bizarre act can be interpreted in two ways, as the symptom of a broken mind, or as a deliberate performance of absolute power. This is where the machinery of Roman propaganda takes center stage. The history of the early emperors was largely written by the senatorial class, the very group Caligula spent his reign tormenting. After his brutal assassination, his successors had a powerful incentive to justify the murder. What better way to legitimize killing an emperor than to paint him as an inhuman monster, a tyrant so deranged that he was no longer fit to rule? Stories of his horse living in a marble house and being promised a consulship were perfect for this purpose. They were memorable, outrageous, and perfectly illustrated his contempt for the Roman state and its traditions. Propaganda is not about subtle lies, it is about creating a grand, simplified narrative that sticks. The Incitatus story was a masterstroke, a piece of political blackmail against Caligula's memory that was so effective we are still debating its truth today. So, do we dismiss it all as fabrication? Not entirely. The most compelling interpretation lies in the psychological space between pure insanity and cold calculation. Caligula was a young man thrust into absolute power, surrounded by conspiracies and the lingering trauma of a near-fatal illness. His actions could be seen as the product of a paranoid and possibly unstable mind, but one that was also brilliantly, sadistically creative. Making his horse a consul was not just a random act of madness, it was the ultimate power play, a piece of political theater so extreme that it demonstrated his authority to redefine the very rules of society. He was showing the aristocracy that his will was the only law, that he could elevate an animal to their most cherished office if he so desired. It was intimidation through absurdity. This one story has endured because it is more than just a historical curiosity, it is a powerful symbol. It perfectly encapsulates the ancient warning about power corrupting absolutely. When one person holds unchecked authority, the normal rules of society begin to dissolve. Reason can be replaced by whim, and tradition can be trampled by a single individual's desire. The image of a horse adorned in imperial purple, standing in a stable fit for a king, is a haunting metaphor for a world turned upside down by tyranny. It asks us a difficult question: when a ruler's whims become law, what separates a noble statesman from a beast of burden? The legend of Incitatus endures not because it is necessarily true in every detail, but because it feels true to the terrifying nature of absolute power. So where does this leave us with Emperor Caligula and his equine companion, Incitatus? The historical record confirms the core of the bizarre tale. The horse was real, a champion racer lavished with a level of luxury that deliberately mocked the Roman elite. He lived in a marble stable, wore imperial purple, and was served by his own household staff. The central claim, however, that he was officially appointed a consul, wavers under scrutiny. It is far more likely that Caligula's promise was a threat, a piece of brutal political satire aimed directly at the hearts of the senators he despised. The story's enduring power lies not in its literal truth, but in its symbolic perfection. It captures the terrifying absurdity of his reign, a world where the traditional order was inverted by a single man's whim. This legend reminds us that history is rarely a simple record of facts. It is a tapestry woven from documented events and the interpretations, and often the propaganda, of those who live to tell the tale. The most persistent stories, even the outlandish ones, often reveal a deeper truth about the society that told them, exposing its deepest fears and its most cherished values. The tale of the horse who almost became a consul is not just about one emperor's madness, it is a warning about the corrupting nature of absolute power. It forces us to ask a final, compelling question. What do you think? Was Caligula a genuinely unstable mind, or was he a sinister master of political theater, using absurdity itself as a weapon? Share your own theories in the comments below.